In this video, we're going to cover namespace routing by source IP. DNS Edge now enhances the granularity of DNS query forwarding in your network. Now, a service point from DNS Edge acts as the first hop in a client's network journey, and they're designed to be like a control tower guiding queries to the correct runway and destination gate. To do this, the service point contains a rule repository that is configured per site from its designated customer instance. Part of this repository includes namespace configurations that help refine how Edge will forward queries from each site. Now, namespace configurations already provide such features as the ability to serve expired queries from cache, forwarding based on domains, as well as providing a health check on the forwarding servers that have been configured at the namespace. So now we've extended that coverage to include forwarding rules based on source IP. Now, when would a client want to forward based on source IP? So a client site can have many devices accessing its network, such as laptops, tablets, IoT devices, all of them with unique source IPs. Now, source IP configuration at the namespace level provides granular control over the path a device's DNS traffic will take in the client network. In this instance, not only does a client site have many types of devices, but these devices can all have different purposes and reasons for access to particular areas of the network. A customer may have security cameras installed at their warehouse locations, but they want to ensure that these IoT devices don't have their network traffic travel to or through certain internal forwarders, because many times IoT devices are targeted by malicious actors for use in events such as amplification attacks. A client site can also be set up where blocks of IP addresses are assigned based on the purpose of the device being assigned an address. Source IP configuration at the namespace level also takes this into account by allowing CIDR blocks to be assigned as configurations on the namespace. From a security perspective, restricting network access based on source IP or IP blocks helps reduce the plane of attack at a client site, while also increasing the efficiency of DNS resolution. In this case, it can be reducing latency because it reduces the number of internal hops needed to respond to a client's query. Now let's see how we can set this up. In this demonstration, we're going to apply source IP configurations at the namespace level based on the second use case using the CIDR blocks, but whether it's CIDR blocks or individual IPs, the workflow remains the same. So here we are on the DNS Edge customer instance, and we're going to go ahead and click on the hamburger menu at the top left-hand corner of the screen, and we're going to go to the sites. So we're first going to see that this is the client site that we're going to add these configurations to, and you'll see that this particular client site has two namespaces available, client internal and the client external. We're going to set it up so that the initial CIDR block covering users and cloud instances will be resolved by namespace, a client internal namespace, while the IoT devices of tablets and cameras, their queries will be sent to the client external namespace. So let's go ahead and set that up. You'll see that we now have a choice in the menu of IP address lists. These lists are very much like domain lists. So this is where we will set the CIDR blocks that we wish to enforce at the namespace level. So I'm going to go ahead and create the first list, which is client machines and cloud. And I will just add the same name under the description. And I will add the CIDR block that was listed in that example. And I'll click to save. I will then create a second list that will cover the tablets and security cameras that we saw in our second example. And under IP addresses, utilize the block that was set for those devices. Now that we have both IP address lists set and configured, we can then go to the namespace level and then set the configurations for each one. So we'll start with the internal server. And so at the client namespace for internal server, what we'll want to do is we edit this namespace so that we can add this configurability. And you'll now see that there's a choice on the screen underneath domain lists to add source IP lists. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll add as a match list the client machines and cloud IP lists that we had configured previously. And then as an exception list, just to make sure, we're going to add the tablets and security cameras list. And so the match list means that the IP addresses for the machines that match that CIDR block that we had set, those will then be resolved through the forwarder listed here under this namespace. That is 4.5.6.7, clearly an example IP address of the forwarder. On the exception side, it means that any queries coming from source IPs within this CIDR range that we had set under tablets and security cameras, those will then move on to the second namespace that has been set. So we'll go ahead and save these changes. We'll update the IP lists. And now we're going to come to the external server. And so this is where we want the queries from the tablets and security cameras to be matched. Now, normally once you've set the match and exception at the first level, you wouldn't necessarily need to then specify the match at the second level, but we're going to do so here just for the sake of completeness. And also in case of examples where you may have third, fourth, or fifth namespaces set, and so you want to ensure that the include at the second level still happens. So we're going to go ahead and edit this namespace. And at the source IP level, under match, we're now going to add the tablet and security cameras list, just to ensure that these queries from these machines will be resolved using the second namespace, which is then pointing to quad 8. So we'll go ahead and we'll save that. And again, DNS Edge reminds you that you are changing a setting that will affect this particular site. In this case, it's a client site, which is the exact site we want to adjust. So we'll go ahead and update the IP list on that namespace. And so that's it. In a nutshell, that's how you can add that type of configurability and security to the traffic that comes from different devices within your network.